Hi guys, welcome to Pointy Not Sharp. Today we're taking a look at the Imperial German Zeitengewehr 84/98 Type 1 or first pattern or alter art or older model bayonet, depending on what you want to call it. I prefer the first pattern, probably the most appropriate name. These were made to fit the Gewehr 98 as well as the carbines of that rifle. And while it will fit the carbines, it's probably not terribly appropriate for them because it doesn't have a flash guard. And when they released the second pattern of this in 1915, it did have a flash guard to stop the charring and the blackening of the wooden handle. Now, these were originally Zeitengewehr 71/84 bayonets, and in 1905 they were converted into this pattern here to fit the Gewehr 98. I'll get to that, the reason why, shortly. Now, the conversions were carried out by Erfurt and Danzig, and it's not known how many conversions were done, although I dare say quite a few. So we'll jump into the history behind this bayonet here. So in 1898, the Imperial Germans obviously released their Gewehr 98 rifle, and with it, they had the mammoth Zeitengewehr 98 bayonet. This is so big I'm not even going to try to get it all into frame. And it was an incredibly long and cumbersome bayonet. Does not want to go back in the scabbard. And what was at the time deemed to be fantastic for infantry, probably not terribly relevant for rearish troops like your bicycle units, machine guns, Zeppelin troops, telegraph troops, soldiers of that nature, people who don't want this huge cumbersome scabbard hanging off their belt and banging on everything while they're trying to get on with their job. So initially they got the KS98 bayonet. I've done a previous video on those. They're fantastic, very hard to get, very cool little bayonet, and not to be confused with the extra Zeitengewehr ceremonial dress bayonets. Everyone always seems to think they're KS98s. They're not. Anyway, the KS98, while an absolutely fantastic bayonet, it was very expensive to manufacture. So they had a small number of them, and instead of going through the process of spending all this money to outfit bicycle troops and Zeppelin troops, telegraph troops with KS98s, they found it much cheaper to just convert the 71/84 bayonets they already had in service. I've done a previous video on the 71/84 as well, if you want to check that out. It's a good little video. I think it's an Austrian one though. So there weren't a terrible lot of modifications that needed to be done. It was a relatively cheap process. I mean, the blade is the same. The only real changes is, first off, they've removed the muzzle ring. They've added a new handle and a clearance hole for clearing debris out of the mortise. And they've attached a completely new pommel. So while the old pommel had a straight finish, this one has a curved finish. And the reason for that is the mounting device is a bit different, or the bayonet lug. So previously it had a smaller bayonet lug and it was assisted by a muzzle ring. Now we have a very large bayonet lug and no muzzle ring. So we need a larger pommel to accommodate that larger bayonet lug. And as you'll see, we have a TO style of mortise. So the cleaning rod on the base of the bayonet lug will actually enter into the handle and push all the way down the end. And that's why we have a clearance hole to clear out dirt and debris that gets pushed in by the cleaning rod. Now, these served their purpose pretty well, but they didn't have enough of them leading into the First World War. So in 1915, they started a second production, or the second pattern of these, and they were made from scratch. They weren't converted. They were purpose made. There were a couple of small differences, like the addition of a flash guard, and we have a straight pommel. We don't have this big curved thing like we have on the Zeitengewehr 98/05, or the butcher blade, which is probably the more common bayonet that the Imperial Germans were using in the First World War. Now, the 1915s also didn't take a leather scabbard. You'll see this one does have a leather scabbard. And the reason for that is they were trying to save leather. So leather was a premium and they needed it for boots and other things like that because they, raw materials were hard to get, and they were happy to use steel for a scabbard and save the leather for something else. It should also be pointed out that 6% of these bayonets that were converted had sawbacks, and that was in line with Imperial German doctrine at the time that 6% of all bayonets, regardless of type, would have a sawback. And those sawback ones sell for stupid money these days, but very, very happy to get to play with this one today, even though it doesn't have a sawback. But we'll jump into the construction. So as you can see, we've got the blade from the 7184 with a really big squared fuller that goes all the way pretty much to the tip. We have an unsharpened false edge, very slight, and this one's actually still pretty sharp even after 140 years. It was made in 1888. We have a nice thick blade and a really big solid crossguard. And you see our wooden grips retain sort of like the two bumps here and here, which was what you saw on the 71/84 bayonet. I believe the grips are completely new because this extension down here didn't exist on the 71/84, so that's more material, so they are made from scratch, and they've decided to maintain these two humpback bumps. It's retained by 2 screws, and you can see here where the tang is inserted into the pommel and comes up all the way here to my fingernail on both sides. Then we just have a standard press button, just like virtually every other bayonet of the day, with a ramped lug on the inside. Having a look at the scabbard, we've got the leather body with our 2, I don't know what you call these, channels running down either side, very German. We've got a locket at the top with a very Germanic frog stud with our horizontal lines. That's just typically German. As you can see, the bayonet only goes in one way. We have a nice big mouth retained by a screw, and down the end we have our chape, and that's just retained by 2 staples. And on the back we have our 2 channels, and it's just stitched together down the back. So that's the construction. The markings are where this gets a little bit more interesting. So these will have the original manufacturer's markings from when they were 71/84 bayonets, and they were made all throughout Imperial Germany. So they were made predominantly in Zollingen, the town of Zollingen, which is just the home of blade makers. And if you want to know more about Zollingen, I recommend reading this book. It goes into depth into all the different manufacturers. Fantastic little resource, can't recommend it enough. But there are so many different manufacturers and so much information for the scope of this video, I'm not going to include it. This one here was made by an unknown manufacturer in the town of Zamera. I found a couple of references that it could be one of a couple of different manufacturers, but I don't know which. So the manufacturer marking you will always find on the ricasso, and usually it will be a manufacturer's marking and not just the town. This is one of the exceptions, but these Zamera ones are quite difficult to get. They are, not the typical. And occasionally they will have 2 manufacturer markings. So one will be the original manufacturer, and the other will be Erfurt or Danzig, which will be the conversion. But that's the exception and not the rule. Now the next markings you're going to come across are those on the spine. If I can get that to focus, probably not. So up the top you'll have your Royal Cipher, and I always get a bit confused with these. So this one here has the Royal Cipher for Kaiser Wilhelm. I believe some of them have the Royal Ciphers for their individual states, like if they're a Bavarian bayonet, for example. But and then others have them for the overall empire. But this one has Kaiser Wilhelm, and you see under that we have the year of manufacture 88 or 1888. Now some of you history buffs might be all over this, but 1888 was the year that Kaiser Wilhelm I passed away, and Kaiser Frederick, I think it was, came to power for 3 months, and then he passed away, and then Kaiser Wilhelm II in late 1888. So we had 3 Kaisers in 1 year. And there is no way to know if this is Kaiser Wilhelm I or the second. And from what I can tell, no one's ever seen a royal cipher with an F for Kaiser Frederick. I don't know if they even got around to making the dies for it before he passed away. And then underneath that, we have, what's that? Just an inspection mark. So nothing too fancy. Then moving down to the pommel, above the reverse of our press button, we have 2 more inspection marks, and they will be a crown over a Gothic letter. I haven't found any reference material outlining what the individual meaning is, other than they are inspection marks. And then crossguard, where are we? Just here. Crossguard and the scabbard, I should say. We have our regimental markings or unit markings. So both of these are for reserve infantry battalions. We've got the R and the RE. They both represent reserve infantry battalions, and I think it was 1897 and onwards, which this bayonet is. That's what those mean, but prior to that, they have a different meaning. So if you want to figure out the meaning of markings on bayonets, get this book. It's in Czech. It's very, very cheap. You can buy it directly from the author's website. I think I paid like 20 euros for it. And it's probably just the most detailed for deciphering markings. And the back, it has a good section on unit markings. And I'll briefly explain how they work. So I'll use the scabbard. So on the far left, here we've got 18. That is the regiment number. Then next to that, we have RE, which is the type of regiment. So we have the 18th Reserve Infantry Regiment. The next to that, we have a 3, that's the company, and then 96, that's the rifle number within the company. And you'll notice the size of the font changes depending on importance. So the RE, the type of regiment, is the largest, then the regiment number is the second largest, then the company is smaller again, and the rifle is the smallest. So it's in order of importance. So very, very cool little bayonet. I'm very happy I got to have a good look at it. Sadly, it isn't mine. It belongs to a mate, but it'll sit here and I'll look after it for him for a little while longer. Anyway, guys, if I made any mistakes or left anything out, please feel free to comment below. I'd love to hear what you have to say, and thanks for watching.